Continuing with the last feast of Harlequin. 3. And now I have a confession to make. Despite my reasons for being enthusiastic about Marika and its mysteries, especially its relationship to both Thos and my own deepest concerns as a scholar, I contemplated the days ahead of me with no more than a feeling of frigid numbness and often with a sense of profound depression. Yet I had no reason to be surprised at this emotional state, which had little relevance to the outward events in my life but was determined by inward conditions that worked according to their own, quite enigmatic, seasons and cycles. For many years, at least since my university days, I have suffered from this dark malady, this recurrent despondency in which I would become buried when it came time for the earth to grow cold and bare and the skies heavy with shadows. Nevertheless, I pursued my plans, though somewhat mechanically, to visit Marika during its festival days, for I superstitiously hoped that this activity might diminish the weight of my seasonal despair. In Marika would be parades and parties and the opportunity to play the clown once again. For weeks in advance I practiced my art, even perfecting a new feat of juggling magic, which was my special forte in foolery. I had my costumes cleaned, purchased fresh makeup, and was ready. I received permission from the university to cancel some of my classes prior to the holiday, explaining the nature of my project and the necessity of arriving in the town a few days before the festival began, in order to do some preliminary research, establish informants, and so on. Actually, my plan was to postpone any formal inquiry until after the festival and to involve myself beforehand as much as possible in its activities. I would, of course, keep a journal during this time. There was one resource I did want to consult, however. Specifically, I returned to that outstate library to examine those issues of the Marika Courier dating from December 2 decades ago. One story in particular confirmed a point Thos made in the Harlequin article, though the event it chronicled must have taken place after Thos had written his study. The Courier story appeared 2 weeks after the festival had ended for that year and was concerned with the disappearance of a woman named Elizabeth Beadle, the wife of Samuel Beadle, a hotel owner in Marika. The county authorities speculated that this was another instance of the holiday suicides which seemed to occur with inordinate seasonal regularity in the Marika region. Thos documented this phenomenon in his Harlequin article, though I suspect that today these deaths would be neatly categorized under the heading seasonal affective disorder. In any case, the authorities searched a half-frozen lake near the outskirts of Marika where they had found many successful suicides in years past. This year, however, no body was discovered. Alongside the article was a picture of Elizabeth Beadle. Even in the grainy microfilm reproduction one could detect a certain vibrancy and vitality in Mrs. Beadle's face. That a hypothesis of holiday suicide should be so readily posited to explain her disappearance seemed strange and in some way unjust. Thos, in his brief article, wrote that every year changes occurred of a moral or spiritual cast which seemed to affect Marika along with the usual winter metamorphosis. He was not precise about its origin or nature but stated, in typically mystifying fashion, that the effect of the subseason on the town was conspicuously negative. In addition to the number of suicides actually accomplished during this time, there was also a rise in treatment of hypochondriacal conditions, which was how the medical men of 20 years past characterized these cases in discussions with Thos. This state of affairs would gradually worsen and finally reach a climax during the days scheduled for the Marika festival. Thos speculated that given the secretive nature of small towns, the situation was probably even more intensely pronounced than casual investigation could reveal. The connection between the festival and this insidious subseasonal climate in Marika was a point on which Thos did not come to any rigid conclusions. He did write, nevertheless, that these two climatic aspects had had a parallel existence in the town's history as far back as available records could document. A late 19th century history of Marika County speaks of the town by its original name of New Kalstead, and castigates the townspeople for holding a ribald and soulless feast to the exclusion of normal Christmas observances. Thos comments that the historian had mistakenly fused two distinct aspects of the season, their actual relationship being essentially antagonistic. The Harlequin article did not trace the festival to its earliest appearance. This may not have been possible, though Thos emphasized the New England origins of Marikah's founders. The festival, therefore, was one imported from this region and could reasonably be extended at least a century. That is, if it had not been brought over from the Old World, in which case its roots would become indefinite until further research could be done. Surely Thos's allusion to the Syrian Gnostics suggested the latter possibility could not entirely be ruled out. But it seemed to be the festival's link to New England that nourished Thos's speculations. He wrote of this patch of geography as if it were an acceptable place to end the search. For him, the very words New England seemed to be stripped of all traditional connotations and had come to imply nothing less than a gateway to all lands, both known and suspected, and even to ages beyond the civilized history of the region. Having been educated partly in New England, I could somewhat understand this sentimental exaggeration, for indeed there are places that seem archaic beyond chronological measure, appearing to transcend relative standards of time and achieving a kind of absolute antiquity which cannot be logically fathomed. But how this vague suggestion related to a small town in the Midwest I could not imagine. Thos himself observed that the residents of Marikah did not betray any mysteriously primitive consciousness. On the contrary, they appeared superficially unaware of the genesis of their winter merrymaking. That such a tradition had endured through the years, however, even eclipsing the conventional Christmas holiday, revealed a profound awareness of the festival's meaning and function. I cannot deny that what I had learned about the Marikah festival inspired me with a trite sense of fate, especially given the involvement of such an important figure from my past as Thos. It was the first time in my academic career that I knew myself to be better suited than anyone else to discern the true meaning of scattered data, even if I could only attribute this special authority to chance circumstances. Nevertheless, as I sat in that library on a morning in mid-December, I doubted for a moment the wisdom of setting out for Marikah rather than returning home, where the more familiar rite de passage of winter depression awaited me. My original scheme was to avoid the cyclical blues the season held for me, but it seemed this was also a part of the history of Marikah, only on a much larger scale. My emotional instability, however, was exactly what qualified me most for the particular fieldwork ahead, though I did not take pride or consolation in the fact. And to retreat would have been to deny myself an opportunity that might never offer itself again. In retrospect, there seems to have been no fortuitous resolution to the decision I had to make. As it happened, I went ahead to the town. 4. Just past noon, on December 18th, I started driving toward Marikah. A blur of dull, earthen-colored scenery extended in every direction. The snowfalls of late autumn had been sparse, and only a few white patches appeared in the harvested fields along the highway. The clouds were gray and abundant. Passing by a stretch of forest, I noticed the black, ragged clumps of abandoned nests clinging to the twisted mesh of bare branches. I thought I saw blackbirds skittering over the road ahead, but they were only dead leaves and they flew into the air as I drove by. I approached Marikah from the south, entering the town from the direction I had left it on my visit the previous summer. This took me once again through that part of town which seemed to exist on the wrong side of some great invisible barrier dividing the desirable sections of Marikah from the undesirable. As lurid as this district had appeared to me under the summer sun, in the thin light of that winter afternoon it degenerated into a pale phantom of itself. The frail stores and starved-looking houses suggested a borderline region between the material and non-material worlds, with one sardonically wearing the mask of the other. I saw a few gaunt pedestrians who turned as I passed by, though seemingly not because I passed by, making my way up to the main street of Marikah. Driving up the steep rise of Townsend Street, I found the sights there comparatively welcoming. The rolling avenues of the town were in readiness for the festival. Street lights had their poles raveled with evergreen, the fresh boughs proudly conspicuous in a barren season. On the doors of many of the businesses on Townsend were holly wreaths, equally green but observably plastic. However, although there was nothing unusual in this traditional greenery of the season, it soon became apparent to me that Marikah had quite abandoned itself to this particular symbol of Yuletide. It was garishly in evidence everywhere. The windows of stores and houses were framed in green lights, green streamers hung down from storefront awnings, and the beacons of the Red Rooster bar were peacock green floodlights. I supposed the residents of Maracay desired these decorations, but the effect was one of excess. An eerie emerald haze permeated the town, and faces looked slightly reptilian. At the time I assumed that the prodigious evergreen, holly wreaths, and colored lights, if only of a single color, demonstrated an emphasis on the vegetable symbols of the Nordic Yuletide, which would inevitably be muddled into the winter festival of any northern country just as they had been adopted for the Christmas season. In his Harlequin article Thos wrote of the pagan aspect of Maracay's festival, likening it to the ritual of a fertility cult, with probable connections to chthonic divinities at some time in the past. But Thos had mistaken, as I had, what was only part of the festival's significance for the whole. The hotel at which I had made reservations was located on Townsend. It was an old building of brown brick, with an arched doorway and a pathetic coping intended to convey an impression of neoclassicism. I found a parking space in front and left my suitcases in the car. When I first entered the hotel lobby it was empty. I thought perhaps the Maracay Festival would have attracted enough visitors to at least bolster the business of its only hotel, but it seemed I was mistaken. Tapping a little bell, I leaned on the desk and turned to look at a small, traditionally decorated Christmas tree on a table near the entranceway. It was complete with shiny, egg-fragile bulbs. Miniature candy canes. Flat, laughing Santas with arms wide. A star on top nodding awkwardly against the delicate shoulder of an upper branch. And colored lights that bloomed out of flower-shaped sockets. For some reason this seemed to me a sorry little piece. "May I help you?" said a young woman arriving from a room adjacent to the lobby. I must have been staring rather intently at her, for she looked away and seemed quite uneasy. I could hardly imagine what to say to her or how to explain what I was thinking. In person she immediately radiated a chilling brilliance of manner and expression. But if this woman had not committed suicide 20 years before, as the newspaper article had suggested, neither had she aged in that time. "Sarah," called a masculine voice from the invisible heights of a stairway. A tall, middle-aged man came down the steps. "I thought you were in your room," said the man, whom I took to be Samuel Beadle. "Sarah, not Elizabeth." Beadle glanced sideways in my direction to indicate to her father that she was conducting the business of the hotel. Beadle apologized to me, and then excused the two of them for a moment while they went off to one side to continue their exchange. I smiled and pretended everything was normal, while trying to remain within earshot of their conversation. They spoke in tones that suggested their conflict was a familiar one, Beadle's overprotective concern with his daughter's whereabouts and Sarah's frustrated understanding of certain restrictions placed upon her. The conversation ended, and Sarah ascended the stairs, turning for a moment to give me a facial pantomime of apology for the unprofessional scene that had just taken place. "Now, sir, what can I do for you?" Beadle asked, almost demanded. "Yes, I have a reservation. Actually, I'm a day early, if that doesn't present a problem." I gave the hotel the benefit of the doubt that its business might have been secretly flourishing. "No problem at all, sir," he said, presenting me with the registration form, and then a brass-colored key dangling from a plastic disc bearing the number 44. "Luggage?" "Yes, it's in my car. I'll give you a hand with that." While Beadle was settling me in my fourth-floor room, it seemed an opportune moment to broach the subject of the festival, the holiday suicides, and perhaps, depending upon his reaction, the fate of his wife. I needed a respondent who had lived in the town for a good many years and who could enlighten me about the attitude of Moracavians toward their season of sea green lights. "This is just fine," I said about the clean but somber room. "Nice view. I can see the bright green lights of Maracay just fine from up here. Is the town usually all decked out like this? For the festival, I mean." "Yes, sir, for the festival," he replied mechanically. I imagine you'll probably be getting quite a few of us out-of-towners in the next couple days. Could be. Is there anything else? Yes, there is. I wonder if you could tell me something about the festivities. Such as? Well, you know, the clowns and so forth. Only clowns here are the ones that well, picked out, I suppose you would say. I don't understand. Excuse me, sir. I'm very busy right now. Is there anything else? I could think of nothing at the moment to perpetuate our conversation. Beetle wished me a good stay and left. I unpacked my suitcases. In addition to regular clothing, I had also brought along some of the items from my clown's wardrobe. Beetle's comment that the clowns of Maracay were picked out left me wondering exactly what purpose these street masqueraders served in the festival. The clown figure has had so many meanings in different times and cultures. The jolly, well-loved Joker familiar to most people is actually but one aspect of this protean creature. Madmen, hunchbacks, amputees, and other abnormals were once considered natural clowns. They were elected to fulfill a comic role which could allow others to see them as ludicrous rather than as terrible reminders of the forces of disorder in the world. But sometimes a cheerless jester was required to draw attention to this same disorder, as in the case of King Lear's morbid and honest fool, who of course was eventually hanged, and so much for his clownish wisdom. Clowns have often had ambiguous and sometimes contradictory roles to play. Thus, I knew enough not to brashly jump into costume and cry out, "Here I am again." That first day in Maracay I did not stray far from the hotel. I read and rested for a few hours and then ate at a nearby diner. Through the window beside my table I watched the winter night turn the soft green glow of the town into a harsh and almost totally new color as it contrasted with the darkness. The streets of Maracay seemed to me unusually busy for a small town at evening. Yet it was not the kind of activity one normally sees before an approaching Christmas holiday. This was not a crowd of bustling shoppers loaded with bright bags of presents. Their arms were empty, their hands shoved deep in their pockets against the cold, which nevertheless had not driven them to the solitude of their presumably warm houses. I watched them enter and exit store after store without buying anything. Many merchants remained open late, and even the places that were closed had left their neon signs illuminated. The faces that passed the window of the diner were possibly just stiffened by the cold, I thought. Frozen into deep frowns and nothing else. In the same window I saw the reflection of my own face. It was not the face of an adept clown. It was slack and flabby and at that moment seemed the face of someone less than alive. Outside was the town of Maracay, its streets dipping and rising with a lunatic severity, its citizens packing the sidewalks, its heart bathed in green, as promising a field of professional and personal challenge as I had ever encountered, and I was bored to the point of dread. I hurried back to my hotel room. Maracay has another coldness within its cold, I wrote in my journal that night. Another set of buildings and streets that exists behind the visible town's facade like a world of disgraceful back alleys. I went on like this for about a page, across which I finally engraved a big X. Then I went to bed. In the morning I left my car at the hotel and walked toward the main business district a few blocks away. Mingling with the good people of Maracay seemed like the proper thing to do at that point in my scientific sojourn. But as I began laboriously walking up Townsend, the sidewalks were cramped with wandering pedestrians, a glimpse of someone suddenly replaced my haphazard plan with a more specific and immediate one. Through the crowd and about 15 paces ahead was my goal. "Drive. Thos," I called. His head almost seemed to turn and look back in response to my shout, but I could not be certain. I pushed past several warmly wrapped bodies and green-scarved necks, only to find that the object of my pursuit appeared to be maintaining the same distance from me, though I did not know if this was being done deliberately or not. At the next corner, the dark-coated Thos abruptly turned right onto a steep street which led downward directly toward the dilapidated south end of Maracay. When I reached the corner I looked down the sidewalk and could see him very clearly from above. I also saw how he managed to stay so far ahead of me in a mob that had impeded my own progress. For some reason the people on the sidewalk made room so that he could move past them easily, without the usual jostling of bodies. It was not a dramatic physical avoidance, though it seemed nonetheless intentional. Fighting the tight fabric of the throng, I continued to follow Thos, losing and regaining sight of him. By the time I reached the bottom of the sloping street the crowd had thinned out considerably, and after walking a block or so farther I found myself practically a lone pedestrian pacing behind a distant figure that I hoped was still Thos. He was now walking quite swiftly and in a way that seemed to acknowledge my pursuit of him, though really it felt as if he were leading me as much as I was chasing him. I called his name a few more times at a volume he could not have failed to hear, assuming that deafness was not one of the changes to have come over him. He was, after all, not a young man, or even a middle-aged one any longer. Thos suddenly crossed in the middle of the street. He walked a few more steps and entered a signless brick building between a liquor store and a repair shop of some kind. In the Harlequin article Thos had mentioned that the people living in this section of Maricá maintained their own businesses, and that these were patronized almost exclusively by residents of the area. I could well believe the statement when I looked at these little sheds of commerce, for they had the same badly weathered appearance as their clientele. The formidable shoddiness of these buildings notwithstanding, I followed Thos into the plain brick shell of what had been, or possibly still was, a diner. Inside it was unusually dark. Even before my eyes made the adjustment I sensed that this was not a thriving restaurant cozily cluttered with chairs and tables as was the establishment where I had eaten the night before, but a place with only a few disarranged furnishings, and very cold. It seemed colder, in fact, than the winter streets outside. "Dr. Thos." I called toward a table near the center of the long room. Perhaps 4 or 5 were sitting around the table, with some others blending into the dimness behind them. Scattered across the tabletop were some books and loose papers. Seated there was an old man indicating something in the pages before him, but it was not Thos. Beside him were 2 youths whose wholesome features distinguished them from the grim weariness of the others. I approached the table and they all looked up at me. None of them showed a glimmer of emotion except the 2 boys, who exchanged worried and guilt-ridden glances with each other, as if they had just been discovered in some shameful act. They both suddenly burst from the table and ran into the dark background, where a light appeared briefly as they exited by a back door. "I'm sorry," I said diffidently. "I thought I saw someone I knew come in here." They said nothing. Out of a back room others began to emerge, no doubt interested in the source of the commotion. In a few moments the room was crowded with these tramp-like figures, all of them gazing emptily in the dimness. I was not at this point frightened of them. At least I was not afraid they would do me any physical harm. Actually, I felt as if it was quite within my power to pummel them easily into submission, their mousy faces almost inviting a succession of firm blows. But there were so many of them. They slid slowly toward me in a wormy mass. Their eyes seemed empty and unfocused, and I wondered a moment if they were even aware of my presence. Nevertheless, I was the center upon which their lethargic shuffling converged, their shoes scuffing softly along the bare floor. I began to deliver a number of hasty inanities as they continued to press toward me, their weak and unexpectedly odorless bodies nudging against mine. I understood now why the people along the sidewalk seemed instinctively to avoid Thos. Unseen legs became entangled with my own. I staggered and then regained my balance. This sudden movement aroused me from a kind of mesmeric daze into which I must have fallen without being aware of it. I had intended to leave that dreary place long before events had reached such a juncture, but for some reason I could not focus my intentions strongly enough to cause myself to act. My mind had been drifting farther away as these abject things approached. In a sudden surge of panic I pushed through their soft ranks and was outside. The open air revived me to my former alertness, and I immediately started pacing swiftly up the hill. I was no longer sure that I had not simply imagined what had seemed, and at the same time did not seem, like a perilous moment. Had their movements been directed toward a harmful assault, or were they trying merely to intimidate me? As I reached the green-glazed main street of Maricá, I really could not determine what had just happened. The sidewalks were still jammed with a multitude of pedestrians, who now seemed more lively than they had been only a short time before. There was a kind of vitality that could only be attributed to the imminent festivities. A group of young men had begun celebrating prematurely and strode noisily across the street at midpoint, obviously intoxicated. From the laughter and joking among the still sober citizens I gathered that, Mardi Gras style, public drunkenness was within the traditions of this winter festival. I looked for anything to indicate the beginnings of the street masquerade, but saw nothing, no brightly garbed harlequins or snow-white pierrots. Were the ceremonies even now in preparation for the coronation of the Winter Queen? The Winter Queen, I wrote in my journal. Figure of fertility invested with symbolic powers of revival and prosperity. Elected in the manner of a high school prom queen. Check for possible consort figure in the form of a representative from the underworld. In the pre-darkness hours of December 19th I sat in my hotel room and wrote and thought and organized. I did not feel too badly, all things considered. The holiday excitement which was steadily rising in the streets below my window was definitely infecting me. I forced myself to take a short nap in anticipation of a long night. When I awoke, Maricá's annual feast was in full motion.